So our journey begins into the wonderland of RGB with NZXT's new Hue 2 controller. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of RGB. I lean more towards clean, minimal, and neutral builds with RGB lighting kept to a minimum. This is because my setup is of course for video editing and day-to-day work mostly, and so keeping the lighting practical is the main objective. NZXT wanted to see if they could change my mind though with their new Hue 2 lighting kit, and there is one portion of this kit which is really interesting, and that's the ambient lighting kit for your display. I'm really interested to see if this actually can improve your gaming experience and make it feel more immersive. So to start off our RGB adventure, I built an entire system featuring 11 Hue 2 lighting instances, all using a single Hue 2 controller with an extra channel left over. The new controller is nice and sleek, and the lighting is incredibly scalable when compared to other ecosystems which only allow for 5 or so RGB devices per controller. The Hue 2 has 4 channels, each with up to 6 RGB accessories or 40 LEDs that can be linked together. Your entry ticket into the RGB Wonderland though does come in at over $80 US, which includes the Hue 2 controller and 4 RGB strips for your system. It's still the 2.5-inch form factor from the previous controller, which makes mounting a little bit more versatile, but since it's magnetic at the bottom, you really can mount this thing anywhere in a steel case. Other than your RGB channels, you've also got a micro USB to USB 2.0 connector so that we can interact with the cam software, more on that later, and the hub is powered by Molex, which can be quite finicky and annoying. SATA would have been a much better option here. Also in the system are 6 of the new Air RGB 2 fans. Now these are identical to the original Air RGB fans. The 2 is just to denote the compatibility since they're addressed with different instructions. They still daisy chain together with one fan linking to the next, which is overall a huge plus for connectivity, but cable management is potentially a nightmare if you're not prepared to spend 5 or so minutes managing things behind the scenes. And I feel like cable management is a massive consideration with any lighting setup, especially when you're adding several elements like I have here in this system, because the whole intention of RGB lighting is to improve the overall look and feel of your setup, but each accessory that you add requires an additional cable, and so your setup could quickly spiral into an RGB mess if you're not careful. Now, as I said earlier, we're able to run up to 40 LEDs per channel, so with 8 LEDs per fan, that meant that not all of the fans in my system could be daisy chained together, and that last fan in the chain had to be run off its own channel. This is still worlds ahead of other RGB ecosystems though, so no real issues, just a consideration for you guys when you're planning your builds. So interior RGB strips and RGB fans are something that we've seen before, but if you truly want to convert your PC into a Honda Civic, RGB underglow is also an option. Blow-off valve, by the way, is not included. For $38, you're getting 2 strips that are 30 centimeters long with 15 LEDs per strip. The diffusion is also a nice touch, but it could have been slightly more opaque in my opinion, as I could still distinguish the individual LEDs within the glow. Connection here is via the Hue 2, then into the PCI expansion slot so the cable can make its way out of the case, and then to the bottom 2 strips which mount via adhesive. Of course, you will need to make sure you're mounting these on a case with enough height underneath the bottom chamber to make them actually worth it. Lastly here we have the RGB cable combs for $33, which honestly, I think this is taking RGB lighting a bit too far. The entire kit is daisy chained though, which at least minimizes cable clutter, but still, I'm a big fan of custom sleeving, as you guys know, but yeah, I guess this is the part where I say, leave your thoughts and comments down below. One element of the Hue 2 ecosystem that I'm really interested in though is the ambient lighting kit. This is objectively the most practical aspect of the lighting system, as it does pose functional benefits for reducing eye strain and improving immersion. Here you get your own Hue 2 ambient hub, which has 2 4-pin channels for the RGB strips, and you've also got a few different lengths here to suit whatever size display you have. The hub is powered from a wall adapter and then plugs directly into your rear I/O via USB. Now, since I'm using a 24-inch panel here, I didn't have a whole lot of room at all for a ton of strips, so initially I just started with 4, so 2 per channel, but unfortunately this is not compatible with the ambient smart mode. There you'll need to run a minimum of 3 RGB strips per channel, so 6 in total, and it's here that I ran into my first issue, and that's that I really had no room for those bottom strips. I could have easily mounted a single strip here underneath the I/O, but since it requires 2 here, it's not mounted properly at all. By the way, they mount via these thin adhesive strips, which will last about an hour before they peel off themselves. So you'll want to grab additional double-sided tape or Velcro tape from your nearby hardware store if you want to actually make this work. So definitely before buying, I'd take a look behind your monitor and see if you have a flat, unobstructed surface where you can actually mount the strips, and planning ahead is definitely recommended. Now, setting up the ambient mode in cam is pretty easy. It just asks for the position of each strip in each channel to calibrate, and after that it's all complete. So I first hopped onto YouTube to see how that would look for general videos, and it's here that I began to notice the biggest downfall of the Hue 2 ambient lighting kit. So the general idea here is that the perimeter of each frame will be sampled, and then the corresponding LEDs at that edge will copy the same color. But simply put, the update rate for the LEDs just feels a little bit too slow. It feels like roughly 15 or 20 Hertz, which isn't going to be incredibly jarring, but it truly is the difference between being immersed into what you're playing or watching, or being distracted by the slight delays. Faster paced games like first-person shooters will be the most jarring here, with adventure and role-playing games being a lot more tolerable. In Battlefield 1, for example, this was even more apparent, and instead of pulling me into the game and immersing me, it actually gave me a pretty moderate headache. Now, this was due to 2 main things. The first, of course, being the slow update rate for the LEDs, so the transitions are ever so slightly choppy, but secondly was just how strong and intense the backlighting was at times. Here, for example, I passed through a corridor by some windows, and this caused the LED strips to literally strobe on and off, which was very distracting, and as I said, gave me a pretty decent headache. Of course though, it's not just passing through those bright windows on that certain map. There were plenty of instances where I felt the strobing effect was a bit too harsh. For the next game, I disabled the ambient mode completely and I just enabled LEDs to white, which in reality is a cool blue since it's RGB and not RGBW. But basically with a static backlight, I was able to actually focus on the game a lot better. I wasn't distracted by any strobing and my headache went away after about 15 minutes. So the Hue 2 ambient lighting kit for your display just lacks that little bit of polishing and optimization on the software side. Hardware seems good for now. Now, ultimately, I would like to see a bit of a middle ground between the static backlighting for your display and the dynamic ambient mode, as the ambient mode by itself was just way too harsh. As I said, I could not game on it without getting a headache. I think one consideration NZXT could take to their software team would be to sample from a larger amount of pixels from each edge instead of just sampling from a couple. This way you're averaging out a lot more pixels and you're going to have a much smoother transition from frame to frame, and that should stop or at least minimize the strobing effect quite significantly. The update rate and the delay of the LEDs is also an issue, and hopefully this is just a software side thing and it's not bound by the speed of their microcontrollers. And so the lighting ecosystem as a whole, I'm really impressed by. NZXT have done a great job with compatibility and customization, even if a couple of their accessories don't make a whole lot of sense to me personally. For case lighting, I can definitely recommend the new Hue 2 controller along with their Air 2 fans and magnetic RGB strips. It's pretty much the best out there in my opinion. If you're thinking of grabbing the ambient lighting kit, just be aware of its shortcomings in its current state. You will need to grab some additional mounting strips, as I said earlier, because the ones that come fitted with the strips are just way too weak for the majority of monitor surfaces. At this time, I just can't recommend the ambient mode as a practical feature for gamers, and that sucks because it really is the main selling point of this kit. It still has a bit of optimization ahead of it before I can actually recommend it for your setup. Having the Hue 2 ambient lighting kit in static mode is a lot more practical at this moment, and it's a lot more useful from gaming and even just day-to-day work, but of course you could achieve that same result with a much cheaper solution. So guys, let me know down below what you think of the Hue 2 and the Hue 2 ambient lighting kit. And if you do have the ambient lighting kit, let me know what your experience has been down below. Maybe it's just my sample. I haven't seen a whole lot of reviews online. Personally, I found gaming to be, it was completely unusable, which is a big shame because I really was looking to that extra immersion in game. So guys, subscribe down below. A huge thanks for watching as always. And I'll see you all in the next one.